introduction with some people who've already been through that process. And I hope that they've got quite a lot to add to the conversation and lift the debate. We have a number of mayors and executive staff from local government, and I appreciate many of you attending. So we've got Janet Davidson, Deputy Lord Mayor of the City of Perth, representing the Lord Mayor, Linton Reynolds, the Commissioner for Canning, which is the suburb I live in, Brad Pettit, the Mayor of Fremantle, Dave Griffiths, the Mayor of the City of Gosnells, Henry Zalonis, the Mayor of Armidale, Logan Hallett, the Mayor of Coburn, Heather Henderson, the Mayor of the City of Perth. Kevin Trent, the Deputy Mayor of the City of South Perth, and along with representatives from State Government, Jan Stewart from Lottery West, David Ansell from Department of Culture and the Arts, Eric Lumsden from the Department of Planning, and also one of our special guests, Paul Johnson, the Vice-Chancellor of UWA, who has a very vested interest in local government reform, considering he's got 3 jurisdictions cutting his precinct. So we've got many members in attendance today, so I think it's very good that we've got commerce and government coming together over this very important topic. And I also acknowledge Gay McMath, who's the Director of the Committee for Perth, and sitting right here. And to our speakers, Rodney Hyde, QSO, former New Zealand Minister for Local Government with key responsibility for transforming Auckland into the super city model. I think he's going to say a few things that are controversial, and hopefully that will spark some further debate. We've also got Rob Ford, the head of the Transition Agency, taking the super city model into a reality, along with his colleague Rob Fisher. And they will be joined by Jude Munro, who is our domestic expert on local government reform, having been the former CEO of the City of Brisbane, an advisor to many governments on the East Coast, as well as the federal government on local government. So welcome to you all. We look forward to the presentations that will come, and the format that we're going to use is Rodney will speak first, then we're going to have Mark talk about the transition arrangements, and then we're going to get Jude's perspective. I'm then going to ask each of the panellists to come up and just give us a quick flick through what they learned, what they liked, what they didn't like about what they heard, and then we'll open it up to you for questions. So on the panel we'll have Rob Fisher from the New Zealand experience, Rob Butler, Councillor at the City of Perth, Brad Pettit, the Mayor of Fremantle, and Linton Reynolds, who's the Commissioner. So I think we'll have some diversity of views around local government reform. So the way we operate is we share our information freely and widely. So the purpose of this visit has been for 2 days of meetings with stakeholders and influencers and decision makers, and I'm not in the room. So other than the public events which we're holding now, the events where they've had meetings with Department of Local Government and will need to do local government later on, I'd stay in the room. It's up to questions to be without fear or favour and advice offered on the same basis. So over 2 days, we started with a briefing session this morning. There was a meeting with the Department of Local Government, the lunch now, then they will meet with local government elected mayors, members and some CEOs after this, do a media interview, have a couple of hours rest, and then we'll sit in on the Minister's briefing to non-government members of the Committee for Perth tonight, and tomorrow they'll back up with a full program again. So the purpose of this visit is really to speak to as many stakeholders as possible. Thank you to all of you who have taken tables today, the University of Western Australia, the City of Gosnells, Ernst & Young, KPMG, the Town of Victoria Park and Herbert Smith Freehills. And you will have noticed each of you received a gift, and that's from AECOM, and it's a story about Auckland, which they were heavily involved in, and I commend the book to you. It's very interesting. I was given a copy a while ago. And Mark Pettigrew, who's their Regional Managing Director, will give the vote of thanks later on in the proceedings. So we're 97 members strong, covering institutions and organisations that employ many thousands of people, and local government touches each one of us, as employees, as workers and as citizens. So it's interesting that, from what I understand, when the department's been out in shopping centres and asked about the local government reform issue, there doesn't seem to be a lot of appetite out in the community, so perhaps we're just not aware of how important local government is in our everyday lives. I'd like to acknowledge our foundation level members, Ernst & Young, ANZ and Herbert Smith Freehills, as well as our corporate members, UWA, AECOM, who have also been very helpful in putting my next study tour together, and KPMG, who have sponsored part of this proceedings for the 2-day visit. So thank you all to all of our members who are the ones who fund us. We receive no funding from government to contribute to this work. So as your main meals will come out in a minute, I wanted to let you know that for the first time we're actually recording the proceedings today because we feel this is such an important topic. So we'll capture the sentiment and then that will allow us to put it up on our website for others to see. So in your conversations, towards a bright future, our document, which looked at Perth growing to 3.5 million people, we countenanced two scenarios for the future of Perth. And in terms of governance, our bright future vision sees a region which evolves with the times and whose government, business and community sector work together through a shared vision, collaborative action and good governance to achieve a positive future. This is contrasted against the worst case scenario, which we call business as usual. And we think then Perth is a region that will be stuck in its past, lacks a shared vision, fails to collaborate and is undermined by fragmented governance. So hence today's discussion with our visitors who have experience from elsewhere is to really sustain some debate. The committee exists to catalyse and sustain debate, and it's interesting that sometimes we carry on when others have feared that they're never going to get anywhere. So I'm really hopeful that the two-day visit does spark some further discussion about what's possible. I'll leave you to eat now, chat amongst yourselves, and I'll be back to introduce Rodney very soon. Thank you. Please keep eating. Just a bit of shush so we can get on with the proceedings. So I'm going to ask Rodney to speak first and a bit about Rodney's background. Rodney Hyde is New Zealand's leading proponent of accountability and transparency in government. He's also Parliament's most highly qualified environmentalist. He entered Parliament in 1996 as an activist MP, now I'm not quite sure what that means, and became leader in 2004. Rodney has a master's degree in economics from Montana State University and resource management from Canterbury Lincoln Universities. He's highly acknowledged as one of the country's most effective politicians. He's a tireless promoter of ACT's vision of free and prosperous New Zealand, where the role of government is limited to protecting the freedom of its citizens. A classic Liberal from a hard-working background, Rodney has made his name in Parliament as a defender of ordinary Kiwis' rights and freedoms. The founding chairman of the ACT Party, predecessor the Association of Consumers and Taxpayers, and founding president of ACT when it was established in 1994, he's been instrumental in the establishment and evolution of ACT as New Zealand's Liberal Party. Rodney was Minister for Local Government 2008 to 11, Regulatory Reform, and Associate Minister for Education 2010-11. Please make Rodney welcome.
Thank you, Marion. That was very lovely. I should add that I'm retired from Parliament at this moment. All my life I have heard how wonderful Perth is. And all my life I've wanted to come here. And I've never had the opportunity. And so it's thank you to Marion for the invitation. And I jumped at it. And I have to say, you have truly the most beautiful city imaginable. And I feel a bit bad coming over here. I don't want to be seen to be lecturing you or suggesting to you what you should be doing, because it seems to me here in Perth you have such a lot that's right and wonderful. But I thought I would share with you, because this is what got me here, the experience that we've had in sorting out the governance in Auckland. Since 1989, we had reforms in local councils in 1989, and since 1989, our major city of 1.4 million people has had 8 councils, 7 sort of geographic councils around the region, and 1 regional council over the top. From day one, it was obvious that it was fragmented, and more especially, it was divided. So for some reason, the culture of the councils was not to work together, but rather actually to get elected by bitching about one another and thinking that one council was getting one over you and you would defend your patch. It was also very clear in the face of the sort of difficulties that you have in local council that there was no accountability back to the voters because there was no council or mayor particularly in charge. We had lots of them, but no one was especially responsible for the whole lot. And of course, the issues that we were confronting with transport and infrastructure, as the city like Perth was growing so rapidly and is growing so rapidly, was that no one was across it all. And so there was no accountability for fixing it. There was also absolutely no possibility for any engagement. In New Zealand, we have 2 levels of government, and there was absolutely no possibility of engagement between the central government and the local councils in Auckland. It couldn't be done. In fact, I'm quite famous because I united the mayors and the council in Auckland when I fired them. So I got them all in the room for the first time together and agreeing with each other. Having the 8 councils also meant that we had a great deal of duplication and waste, particularly in infrastructure, but also in consenting procedures and whatnot. The previous government to the one I was a minister in, Helen Clark, she didn't want to touch local government. It was thought to be a political hot potato. But even her government grew angry and frustrated with Auckland. In particular, they tried to give the city a brand new stadium ahead of the Rugby World Cup. So the taxpayer would pay for it and Auckland would get it for free. And the councillors started bickering amongst themselves about where it should go, and it never happened. And so what the government of the day did was organise a commission, an actual royal commission of inquiry into the proper structure for Auckland, but cleverly timed it to report after the election. So I was campaigning into that election in 2008, thinking I'd get about 5 MPs, and that what would I like to do? And I was a member of Parliament for Auckland, and I wanted to do something useful, and I figured that the Conservative government of which I'd be a part would unlikely want to take the Royal Commission's findings and run with it. So I decided that I would be the Minister of Local Government and implement the Royal Commission's findings. So the Royal Commission reported, and we set to replace the 8 councils with 1. It's very important to appreciate in what we did was that we didn't merge them. I think it would have been easier if we had, in one sense, because it would have lessened the risk, but it would have greatly reduced the outcome. So what we did was we passed legislation that said all the councils will disappear at the date of the next election, and there'll be 1 new council to take their place. Its structure yet to be advised. By the way, we received the Royal Commission and gave the government response 17 days later, which set the timetable for implementing it. The Royal Commission itself recommended 6 councils for Auckland, down from 8. And I told the chairman of the Royal Commission that I was bitterly disappointed because the government had spent $4.5 million on their report. And I said to him, why would you recommend 6 councils? And he said the Commission felt that 1 wouldn't have been politically acceptable, to which I did my nana at the judge, because it seemed to me that we'd set up the Commission under the authority of the Queen to be free of politics. And quite frankly, it disgusted me that these characters had run around and decided to do the politics rather than actually think about what was the best structure for Auckland. So I recommended to the Cabinet that we have 1 council, and the Cabinet happily agreed. And so what we did was, through legislation, build a whole new structure and a whole new organisation, which meant that it wasn't one council taking over another, it was actually a new council, and also that we could achieve the cultural shift that we were looking for. The cultural shift in thinking about Auckland as a whole and what Auckland needed for the future, and the cultural shift that we were desiring in terms of a customer focus for services. The legislation basically eliminated the council and therefore all the jobs. That was 10,000 jobs. We rolled over all of the Tier 4 and 5 positions, which kept the unions on board, and appointed people to every position at Tiers 1, 2 and 3, getting a good mix of people from the various councils who were the most competent, but also bringing in people from central government and indeed from the private sector. The biggest problem that we had, for me, surprisingly was, maybe not for you, but surprisingly for me was IT. And I remember, you'll hear from Mark Ford, because I remember we had all these work streams going and we got down to the IT and we're just debating what it cost. I thought it was 110 million, but Mark's assuring me it was 75 million. So I'm going to go back and check where that missing 35 million is. Somewhere, Mark. But I remember saying to him, oh, shit, that's too much. We'll just cancel the IT. We'll do everything else. And as they do, Mark said to me, but Minister, if you don't do the IT, we don't do anything else. And so right up to the day that we went live, in fact, I remember when we were swearing in the new council, sitting there, preparing in my mind what I'd be telling the press the next day if when we turned on the computers they didn't all connect, as we went from 8 councils to 1 council, and thankfully they all worked. Oh, I pushed a button. So the new council has $30 billion worth of assets. Its income and spending a year is $3 billion. We established under the council local boards, but they don't actually have any rating power. They're actually sort of advisory and they have the functions that the council gives them. And we've established what we call in New Zealand CCOs, which have their own appointed boards, and they work to the statement of intent that the council provides. What was the outcome? Stunning, actually. You'll never hear that, but no one will ever want to go back to having 8 councils. The first test was the Rugby World Cup. And what impressed me about that was, not that it worked so well, but that when there was a mistake or a cock-up, it was very clear who was responsible, who was in charge, and they'd have to put their hand up and say, oops, that was me, I'll fix it. And it was fixed. And that's what we'd never seen before in Auckland. We'd always seen before, it was them, no, it was them, and that would never get fixed. We also have a level of accountability and debate in Auckland that we've never before had. Not just about Auckland as it is now, but where it's going to be in the next 50 years. Is it going to grow up? Is it going to grow out? How are we going to get around for transport? What's the right mix between trains and buses? What's the right mix between private transport and public transport? The council has produced the Auckland plan for the whole region, the city centre plan and the waterfront plan. But interestingly, in preparing those plans, because this council now is so big, so significant, it has actually been able to engage with the Cabinet and 23 government departments who have all had input and have worked with the council on that plan. So for the first time, not only do we have Auckland working together, but we have Auckland gelling with central government in agreement about that plan, which to me is astonishing. And indeed, for 98% of it, central government and local government found that they agreed. And the 2% that they disagreed about, well, we've had that debate, we're working through it, and actually that 2% is being settled right now as we speak. There were efficiencies. I never sold it on the basis of efficiencies. I don't think people get excited about saving money, particularly when they get that sense that they're losing something from their community. So I always sold it on the terms of actually Auckland and being able to make decisions for the next 50 years and being able to address the issues that we confronted, which stretched right across the city. But of course, we knew we could get big efficiencies. And so we took 10,000 staff down to 8,000, and that 2,000 that was lost, they were actually managers. And so we saved $94 million in the first year in wages alone. And think of that. That's $100 million every year, forever. The next year, with the new council elected, and I've got to tell you, it's a very left-wing mayor, they saved another $81 million on top of that 94. And again, that $81 million compounds every year, and in their next year, in their second year, they saved another $64 million. Mark Ford, who I'll mention towards the end, but oversaw the transition, he's also in charge of the water utility in Auckland. They knocked $104 million off the cost of that a year. That's big money. The water rates dropped by 15% day one. The water rates were supposed to go, according to the plans that the 8 councils had prepared, up by 39%. Instead, we got a drop. The wastewater went up by 4.5%. It was supposed to go up 37%. Just in the water services and wastewater services, we went from 950 staff to 648. So there's no doubt about it. There are big efficiencies to be had. What are the lessons? To me, they're these. I can't stress how proud I am that when I did it, and with the team I had, we did it properly. And I think you only get to do this sort of reform once in a while. And I think personally it was a huge mistake in 1989 when Auckland went from 40-odd councils down to 8. Because no one believed that 8 was the right number, but it seemed a reasonable compromise. But the 8 became more entrenched than the 40 and harder to shift down to the 1. And I'm so pleased with the fact that we actually said what's best for Auckland and actually did it. The second thing that I observed is do it fast. Because you can have the public on board with the major reform, but their patience wears thin if it's always coming and always coming. And it's a great thing to go to your cabinet and you say, look, Prime Minister, I don't mind whether you decide up or down, left or right, but you have to make a decision this week. And so you kept the politicians up to it. And also, too, we found that our opponents in Parliament and that were trying to lob the grenades, they were always 6 months behind us. So what they're debating about, we'd forgotten about. Secondly, I don't know how it works here, but we empowered the mayor a little bit. We didn't go for an executive mayor because we didn't want the councillors doing nothing, but we gave the mayor a budget. We gave the mayor the ability to structure the committees and to appoint the chairman. And that allows any mayor that's got some political skill to actually be able to articulate a vision and to have the ability to implement it, but also to be held to account by the council. We've got a big problem in Auckland with chief executives, none here in the room, of course. Most of them are good, some of them are rubbish. But it's very, very hard for a council to evaluate whether a chief executive's any good or not, and they can actually ruin a community for a generation or more. And so I think we need to be looking in New Zealand to a sort of government-wide, or in this case maybe a statewide process of evaluating and appointing chief executives so you actually get a better calibre. Key thing in New Zealand is to engage the levels of government. We've expected local councils to be planning for 10 years and for 30 years, but actually central government out there making decisions day by day. And what the Auckland Council reforms did is I chaired a cabinet committee which actually worked with the council on their Auckland plan and which got 23 government departments working with the Auckland Council. One funny thing was the departments themselves had never worked together on Auckland. And I remember sitting there and the transport officials looking across to the education officials and saying, you're planning a school there? And they said, yeah. we better put some roads there then, hadn't we? But the education hadn't talked to the roading about where the schools were going. And our process of planning for Auckland forced that to happen. Finally, I don't know the situation here, but in New Zealand, it was probably the strength of it that the central government can knock local government around a bit. But I think we need to have a much clearer definition of the appropriate roles of the local councils versus central government, and having some constitutional protection and process around that so they really aren't the plaything of central government. Although, having said that, when they were my plaything, I enjoyed it immensely. The final thing I learnt was this, that it's good to have good legislation and it's good to have great policy. But if you have people that aren't so good and poor relationships, you ain't going to get a good result, actually. And you can get by with legislation that's just so-so and policy that's just okay if you actually have good people and good relationships. And I don't think in public policy we emphasise that enough. And I have to say, as a minister, I just kept it simple, and I then got the very best people that New Zealand had to offer to do the job. And this was the largest reform ever undertaken, public or private, in Australasia, and it was done in 17 months. And it's a great privilege to me to have Rob Fisher from the transition agency that oversaw it, and our next speaker, a man that I can't speak too highly of because I've met a lot of great people in my life, but I've only ever met one that could have pulled off what we asked of him, and that's your next speaker, Mr. Mark Ford. Thank you very much.
Well, that was a great scene setter, was it not? Now on to Mark. So we've heard from the politician who had the guts and the intellect to get it through, and now we're going to hear from Mark, who had to take the baby out of the nursery. So Mark is now the Chief Executive of Watercare Services Limited. He's held the role from 1994 to 2009, and then was reappointed following the company's expansion into retail operations. He's an experienced CEO, director and chairman who's worked in water, forestry, transport and petroleum industries. From July 2009 until his recent reappointment to Watercare, he was the executive chairman of the Auckland Transition Agency, the government agency responsible for planning and managing the transition to Auckland's new governance arrangements. Mark also served as chairman of Auckland Transport from 2010 to 12. He's an independent chair of the Christchurch Client Governance Group for the infrastructure rebuild, and is also a member of the Better Public Services Advisory Group. Since the end of the financial year, Mark has been appointed as chairman of Solid Energy Limited. Please make Mark welcome.
It's hard to follow Rodney, isn't it? He's such a motivational. Rodney, let's do it again. I think, as introduced, my name is Mark Ford. I'd like to again acknowledge both Rodney and Rob Fisher. Rob's become a great friend. We've worked together for a number of years. I don't think we've ever argued on anything except where a rugby stadium went in Auckland, but we've got over that. Your worships, councillors, Committee for Perth, who asked us to come over here, we're very pleased to meet with you today. Rodney discussed the policy settings and the background behind the amalgamation. I'm going to probably talk about the boring bits, how it was done. There was, as Rodney said, a very discordant Auckland leadership and the central government were desperate for one voice, whatever it was. They just needed, there was a lot of silo mentality. There was, and look, I faced it chairing Auckland Transport. One mayor would have a pet project, but we relied on funding from all, and another mayor would have a completely opposite, and you got into a spin on all of these things, and I think the government just got terribly frustrated on the issues. There was many voluntary attempts at amalgamation or efficiencies, but they never got anywhere. Always individuals, personalities got involved. And costs, by the way, were escalating. Rates were becoming out of control. Once the decision was made, yes, Rodney asked me to lead the executive charge with the delivery of his vision. It was reasonably easy. We had great policy leadership, a committed team, and what was most important was the deadline. It was a statutory deadline. There was no argument. I think it was a very arbitrary deadline, Rodney, but be that as it may, we had to deliver. There was no, although he told me this morning, he told me that for the first time this morning that they had thought of a way of extending it, but he didn't tell me at the time. In any project, the key is to establish a project plan and a program, and after that, it becomes quite easy. Hire the right people, make sure all the components are covered, and the goals are reasonable and achievable. So if we go back to where we went, we were established in May 2009. I think, Rob, you were supposed to do the overheads, weren't you? I don't know how to do this. Look, I'm totally unqualified technically.
Would you like me to go to the next slide?
Possibly. I don't know what's there. We were established in 2009, and I guess I got a very good board. I had a QC. Rodney allowed me a certain amount of discretion in those appointments. We had a very good QC, receiver, a financier. More a financier than a receiver, but we knew we had to consolidate the balance sheets and the P&Ls, and we had a huge task there, the debt. We needed somebody to just keep the tension in that area. We got a very experienced businessman, but he also was a representative, I think, of Maori, but he was not there as a Maori. I think he was there as a businessman. And I was very impressed with his commitment. And we got an ex-mayor who handled the relationship with the various councils. The final model, as Rodney said, was most of what was recommended by the Royal Commission. But as he said, we were not, or he was not going to accept some of the others, the number of councillors, the number of Maori councillors, the number of local councils. It just went on and on that they just weren't going to work. In the first 2 months, we put together a management team. We were very lucky under the legislation because I could call on anybody from within the councils to help in the transformation at no cost. So it was somewhat despotic. I could just look at the talent and say I wanted that person, and the chief executives had to release that person. No chief executive ever complained because they were all committed to the vision, and I was eternally grateful with that. I had huge cooperation from all the staff. We also got experts from industry. Rob joined me from the legal profession. And we had a small team, and it was a granular process. We just gave each one of those modules a job. It was and reminded them there was 17 months to deliver, and we got on with it. As I've said, to achieve the task in 17 months did require, and I think there's a model. That's just the area. Can we just? That was the model we followed. I was the executive chairman. We had various work stream leaders. We met weekly and went through a whole range of our progress issues. As a board, we met monthly. I reported to the Minister and through him to Cabinet Committee. Met with the Minister and his officials fortnightly. And of course, we had the oversight of the Office of the Auditor General, and we met quarterly. Now, that might seem like an awful lot of meetings, but it wasn't. It was essential. It was communications. It wasn't oversight. It was just to bring everybody on board at the same time. We all had and also no surprises politically. I mean, the last thing you wanted was Rodney to think we were going to spend so much on IT when in fact we didn't. So it was very, very important that that communication was in place. One of the key tools that was given to us was no Auckland legislation went to Cabinet without the transition agency's comments, my comments. It was an exceedingly powerful tool because it stopped zealous bureaucrats who had their own agendas putting in contrary views and Cabinet not knowing what our views were. And with that tool, we were able to solve a huge amount of issues with officials. We had a good team, as I said, 10,000 staff. We had to, all under different collective contracts, we had to bring them all down to one core contract. A lot of people were going to be made redundant. We had to handle that with dignity and through a consultation process. I actually asked, she's been a friend of mine for a long time, although our politics might be, although I never declare my politics, they might be different. I brought in an old friend, Lila Harry, who was an ex-left-wing minister, to handle the labour relations. She did a magnificent job. She had the trust of the staff. Oh, she probably got away with more than I wanted at times, but that was the compromise I made to have such a fantastic and effective leader in that work stream. We started up the new council with not one personal grievance, and a lot of people lost allowances, lost perks that they'd had under various councils. It was all recalibrated to an affordable level. And again, I wouldn't have done it without her, and I wouldn't have done it without the staff themselves being committed to the vision here. We went on and delivered this council. It is unique. As Rodney said, we have a mayor, we have various councillors, and the local boards. Now, I had a debate before about local boards. Local boards are just that. They're there to give a communication forum and enfranchise modestly local communities. It was the whole new structure took a while to bed in because people had to work out exactly how this was going to work. It's all very well seeing it on paper, but to apply it is very different. And I think that model is working very well now. I think the local boards actually feel they are dealing with local issues. We all know issues to do with whether you have a chip seal or tar seal, or whether you have speed bumps in the road or prune a tree, are local issues, and those should be left to the local community to prioritise within a budget. One of the biggest issues we faced, and can we just move on, was this. Every single council had a unique solution for its IT needs. If you look, these are all the general components. Even if there was a SAP system, there were different generations. Not one of them spoke to each other. Every council insisted on its own solutions, or some of that could be just budgetary issues, but we had to, on day one, get every single one of those to talk to each other. The key for Rodney, the Prime Minister, Cabinet, we couldn't have a hiatus on day one. The key to success was not being thanked for it. It was the converse, nobody complaining. And that's exactly what happened. We had startup on day one. Suddenly we were able to get staff for the first time, the communities for the first time could deal with things like planning, registering dogs, on a region-wide basis. They could, in the past, you could only go into your local area. Now you could go anywhere within the region and access it through the systems, get plans, pay your rates bill. First time ever, you could take a library book into the most northern parts of Auckland, or you could take it from there, read it and deliver it to a library right in the south. And there was a system to return those books. Everything was done now on a region-wide basis. We saved huge amounts in costs. Rodney's already talked about the 95 million salary bill, but it wasn't just that. Everywhere there were efficiencies to afford this level of service. The regulatory side of things, we took every single consent down to the minimum of one of the predecessor councils. So we had this dilemma: do we go for the midpoint, that then there'd be winners and losers? So we took everything down to the minimum, but afforded that reduction just from the savings from this new super council. I guess I should really finish. I think there's a few comments, though, to finish with. I do want to thank Rodney. It was quite motivational. I had very good support from the Prime Minister and his colleagues. It wasn't just Rodney, although I reported to him. I guess it's fair to say on transport issues we had to work with the Minister of Transport. And the Minister of Finance was intimately involved in every step we made. They made themselves available continually for that communication. And I want to thank them, I guess, in what we delivered. We delivered a working council on day one that, as Rodney says, was bigger than anything happened before. And it was through communication, it was through the goodwill of the staff, and very, very good policy settings. I think that's all I'm going to say today. Thank you very much.
All right, I think we've got a good understanding of what happened in Auckland, and now we're going to bring our domestic expert to give us some sanity check about how local government works in an Australian context. So Jude Munro is the CEO of 4 local councils, former CEO of 4 local councils in 3 states, including the CEO of the City of Brisbane. She was there for 10 years up until 2010. She's passionate about cities and was ordered an Order of Australia in 2010 for her work in local government. She's appointed to the COAG Task Force on Strategic Planning of Cities. She's a member of the Independent Panel of Review for Local Government in New South Wales. She was the chair of the panel to review councils in southern Tasmania in 2011. She's a former Queensland president of the Institute of Public Administration of Australia and is the member of Chief Executive Women. I know we've got a real issue in common with gender equity. And she's a non-executive director and runs her own consulting business. Please make Jude welcome.
Thanks very much, Marion. And I love Perth, but gee, I'm filled with trepidation coming here as the third person from the east. So, you know, I'm with you. I'm with you. I've called this local government under the microscope, but it could be the telescope or another sort of scope as well. Yeah, someone got that. Yeah, I've had one of those done too. So the challenges facing metropolitan Australia are indeed significant ones. I was at a conference the other day and heard a person from the Grattan Institute speak. It's a Melbourne-based place, but they've done some research, and Marion, I think you heard it as well, that there are 2 cities emerging in each of Sydney and Melbourne, an inner-city professional group, and then there's outer suburban areas with huge disparity. In fact, in outer Melbourne and the southwest and west of Sydney, what we're seeing is people only able to access 10% of all jobs in Sydney or all jobs in Melbourne. And it's because of issues around infrastructure and public transport and private transport. So they are starting to grapple with some very significant issues and faced by those. There was a report that came out called Melbourne 2030 a few years ago, and what it was showing was that if Melbourne was slightly reconfigured, I don't mean dramatically, but their transport systems tweaked and land use planning tweaked, they could increase gross domestic product, not just for Melbourne, not just for Victoria, but for the whole of Australia by 4%. So when I stand here and say strategic planning of cities is important, it's the same as when Rodney was talking about thinking about that future for Auckland in an integrated way. I was on that COAG task force, and what we found were a couple of things. I won't go into all the findings, but the capacity in state governments to work with federal was shocking in Australia, but amongst each other in departments was a really significant issue, and then virtually no state government involved local government in strategic planning for metropolitan Australia. So generally, planning is suboptimal, and I'm not just talking land use planning, I'm talking transport, social, housing, community services, the lot. My good friend Saul Estlake has hammered into me that over the last 10 years we are basically standing still on the issue of productivity in Australia. My message for you today is that local government should be standing alongside everyone else on lifting Australia's productivity. We in local government, it's unintentional, but we are all holding back that productivity. I'm on that independent panel looking at New South Wales reform. There was a report that came out 40 years ago called the Barnett Report. Well, the funny thing is, if you go onto our independent local government review panel website, what you'll see on that is that our general directions that we're talking about are exactly the same as Barnett came out with but 40 years ago. We're talking about strengthened regional planning and a range of other measures. In 2004, in New South Wales, there were mergers, dropping from 172 councils to 152. And we've been set up to look at it. The question of mergers and, but not just that, but finances, governance, structures, boundaries, and we've come up with a number of recommendations. I can't go into them all here. But for instance, in New South Wales, they don't have a state local government finance agency. And we know from South Australia and Queensland that where there is a place where you can go to for loans that looks and pools the whole of local government risk and the whole of local government's financial assets, you're able to achieve things like, in Queensland, 3.65% is the current borrowing rate, whereas New South Wales, it varies between 5 and 8%. So what we're saying is that's worth $100 million into the system. So a lot of our recommendations in areas like finance are trying to, what I call sweat the financial assets more, to be able to think about it in a better way. Our report has come out. I recommend you to have a look at that. And we're basically, we're consulting on that. I've just completed, and I'm glad I'm still standing today, 7 weeks of visits around all communities, pretty well all communities across New South Wales. And I'm getting to know it intimately. The irony being that I said to my partner a few years ago, look, I've worked in a lot of states across Australia, but I've never had much time spent in New South Wales. And my partner, when this one came up, said, well, you better go for it. But I'm really getting to see the motels and hotels of rural New South Wales in ways, and my partner said to me, well, you better develop up a short list for future visits for us, because I'm not going to all of them. We have stressed strategic capacity rather than financial savings. And Rodney made that point very powerfully, didn't you, Rod? That it's that area that really we need to be picking on. It's this area of being able to have the big picture. I despair across all the jurisdictions in Australia that local government, in most of the jurisdictions in the legislation, says that you must govern in the interests of your local government area. I wish it also said with an eye to the bigger context and region, because I think we could get some better outcomes if we did. We have stressed a systems approach. That is, you can't tweak one part of local government, like proposing amalgamations, without doing other things like the state local government finance agency. So we've used a systems approach, and we have included options. There's an area in the legislation that's called county councils. It's an old-fashioned term, but basically we're using that to drive not voluntary but mandatory regional planning and also advocacy, and probably also shared services. That notion of really getting that regional advocacy and planning going. Thinking about New South Wales economy, and I acknowledge here today my former colleague Lynn Russell, who you're also CEO in days gone by of Wagga Wagga Council. But what we have looked at is the whole of New South Wales, and have really had a look at the economy and said, where are the powerhouses going to be for the future of New South Wales regionally and rurally, and then been proposing regional centres to really make sure that they can drive down in the future, sometimes in the absence of, say, mining and other things and changing farm technology, to really have a place locally that's a real focus regionally. So that's where we've proposed mergers, mostly there. And in relation to Metropolitan Sydney, we have proposed, and sorry, that should be proposed 15 councils, including 3 global cities of Sydney, Liverpool and Parramatta, each with populations of between 600,000 to 800,000, and other ones smaller than that. So just to give you a perspective, we have in Sydney Hunters Hill at about 16,000 population, so relatively small, up to Blacktown, which is going to be in 2036 growing to 500,000 in population. It is really a historical legacy that really needs to be addressed. And that notion of Sydney as a global city, but then components within it that will really drive the economy. And I've done some work separately, just because I like doing these sorts of things, thinking about capital cities and what are the components that really drive capital cities and make them work. You know that thing about adding up and you get something more because the sum is greater than the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. I really think about that and what's in city terms economics, and the people in this room really, you're at the heart of this. And Perth, I think, is at a really interesting place. I don't know a lot about Perth, but the magnificence of the mining boom, and that's obviously, there's a bit of tapering, but that's had fantastic benefits for Perth. But looking down, out further, what is the situation going to be? Are we starting to face issues around traffic congestion, issues around medium density housing? If I look at Melbourne and Sydney and then reflect back on Brisbane and Perth, I think they are the sorts of futures that potentially are ahead of us. In Queensland, there were in 2007 there were council amalgamations, 157 into 73 councils. That followed on from a size, shape and sustainability project which basically didn't result in any change at all. So a lot of talking, a lot of very good and well-intentioned feelings. New legislation is increasing powers of, and roles of mayors, and I think that's still got to work its way through. 5 councils, I think it might be 4 now, are de-amalgamating, and that's really the result of an election promise. Read in, there was a political component to that. You do need time after there have been amalgamations for processes to settle down, communities to settle down, and responsible councils that manage for the whole to be in place. In Tasmania, I chaired the Southern Tasmanian Councils Authority process, and we recommended, that's Saul Estlake, Stephen Haynes and myself as the panel, recommended a Greater Hobart Council, and we had some fancy relationships between that Greater Hobart Council and the hinterland councils, because we thought that there were contracts and service delivery arrangements that could be beneficial to rural councils, and to really get that relationship economically happening between Hobart and the rest. Our proposal would have created Hobart as a huge mega council of 160,000 people, yeah, right, and so that was just all a bit too much. So that's the result on that is no mergers, and support for smaller rural councils through FAGS redistribution was another area that we worked on. In the City of Brisbane, so I come to you as a former CEO of the City of Brisbane. I'm a great admirer of Brisbane City Council, but I also have some objectivity about it. It's not the answer for every jurisdiction. Brisbane was set up in a situation where the whole 20 councils were brought together in 1925. It was then the whole of metropolitan Brisbane. Even back in those days, there were more people that lived in Queensland outside of Brisbane than in Brisbane. So get the picture. You can't, in an Adelaide situation where there's 1.5 million, go for a metropolitan Adelaide mayor and council with 1.1 million. The competition between a premier and a Lord Mayor for Greater Adelaide would just be impossible. And that's the way I also view the Perth situation. But Brisbane, $3.2 billion budget, 1.2 million population, about 9,000 staff. Buses and ferries, shareholder of water and sewage business, it used to run that directly. Tunnels and bridges. So I stand in front of you as the proud overseer, want of a better, that's almost a colonial term, of putting in a big tunnel, $2.6 billion worth of tunnel. And it also had the typical municipal functions. But the beauty of Brisbane, when it worked well, was its power to lead the vision and the power of that mayor to be able to bring the people of Brisbane. And I haven't run a survey on it, but I reckon just from me asking around, if you said to Brisbane people, oh well, we're going to be cutting up Brisbane Council and making it all councils of 30,000 people or 15,000 people in order that you have better representation, there'd be blood on the floor, because they actually love their council. It's got something like 98% recognition rate amongst residents, and it has a Lord Mayor, 26 ward councillors, so it's quite a simple structure in a way. It has a civic cabinet. There are political parties, and I'm sure in Perth there are concerns about political parties. There are issues when you get political parties into a system, but I'll tell you, in terms of discipline and professional people, even where I worked in a situation where there was a Liberal Lord Mayor, Campbell Newman, and a Labor majority council, in 98% of business, we just went on with that vision and we delivered the vision. The councils are full-time professionals, they're well-resourced. It's a well-known brand, as I've outlined. Ward councillors are also well-resourced, and they typically are returned. In fact, there was one who gets, it's mandatory elections, but she's typically returned with 80% support from her people. And people say to me, how can a person who represents 26,000 people know that community? Well, believe you me, there's any issue cropping up anywhere, Councillor Margaret DeWitt, she's onto it, she knows about it, they're talking to her about it. But what she's not being hassled about is all of the pothole issues. She might get them through her ward office. She's concentrating on the bigger issues, because the customer service system, when it works well, is magic. And people use that system either online or over the phone to deal with those issues. So the notion of representation has changed, I think. But the achievements were also urban renewal, with a $40 million federal injection for drainage works and that sort of thing. $4.3 billion worth of private investment came around the Newstead Fortitude Valley in that area. So very big achievements. That was over a 12-year period, but systematically changing a major part of Brisbane. Large-scale infrastructure, investment in public transport as well, the customer service system. That sits within what the councils in the area, and I recognise Gary Stevenson, CEO of the City of Perth, and Gary was the CEO at Redland Council, but Brisbane City Council and colleagues pushed for the creation of a South East Queensland regional plan. It was fantastic, and but it needs, all of these things need to be injected in a mandatory way, but it allowed for discussion, including the Lord Mayor of Brisbane getting up in front of the community and getting the community involved in Brisbane, saying, do we want to have a metropolitan area that goes all the way from Noosa down to Tweed? Do we want something that stretches effectively a couple of 100 kilometres along that coastline, or do we want medium density housing? What do we want the shape of Brisbane to be like in the future? It's a very powerful discussion, and I'll tell you, it hasn't happened in Sydney and it hasn't happened in Melbourne, where the NIMBYism that is there is actually impeding both that discussion and also people don't realise that Melbourne and Sydney are just going to spread out endlessly and end up being 100 kilometres wide or long or even longer. So these issues around getting a conversation going with the community is critical. Collaboration between state and 10 local councils. My general observations to conclude are voluntary mergers are very difficult to achieve. So my advice here would be have a timetable, get people who are in local government, even though people at their heart they are concerned about at a personal level about jobs. Mayors and councillors at a personal level concerned about community identity, to rise above that because those things can work, and to think about the greater good for any of our areas. Regional and metro planning is a key to Australia's productivity. Sustainability of rural Australia is important. New forms of representation and customer service are emerging, so we should think about local government with all of those technologies that enable us to do our jobs better. Local government is crucial to local and regional leadership, and the Mayor embodies this leadership, and I endorse Rodney's comments about what they have done there, what you did as a Minister, Rodney, to embody that leadership. Increased strategic capacity in local government is important. State governments, though, it's a very interesting one. If local government does become stronger and does have more strategic capacity, then the role of the state government will change, and state government also needs to be reflecting on how they will relate to local government in the future when reform occurs. Successful amalgamations are possible. Community identity, local representation and local democracy can be preserved. And my personal experience as a CEO of 4 councils across 3 states in Australia, so I've managed the City of Adelaide when it had 15,000 people, City of St Kilda 49,000 people, City of Moreland 160,000 people, and the City of Brisbane with 1.2 million people, is that in each of those situations, community engagement, community representation, community identity can all work. They can all work. But what I have observed is some weird gold plating of services and representation that's like personal fiefdoms in very, very small councils, and I'll leave it at that. But that is my reflection on NIMBYism, and the big picture can be impeded by things that really, on reflection, we shouldn't actually be valuing. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
All right. I think we've set a very good scene up now. We're going to have the panel session, and then we'll have a chance to get questions and answers from the floor. So can I have each of the 3 speakers up, please, as well as Rob Fisher, who is also involved in the Auckland Transition Agency and has got a very good legal mind, and Councillor Rob Butler from the City of Perth, Commissioner Linton Reynolds, and Mayor Brad Pettit. Tell me what you liked and what you didn't like about today's presentations. What do you think resonates with you?
I don't know that I like being described to get all that. I guess for me, I'm still not certain about the comparison with the Auckland case, given that we've got a state government and New Zealand hasn't. Because my reading of many of the, I guess, the constraints of Auckland pre-amalgamation are things that our state government technically is required to provide. So the case is a little bit different. But yeah, look, one thing you can take out of that and attitudes is that something I've been saying for donkey's years, voluntary will not happen. It simply will not happen. Egos, fiefdoms, all those things get in the road, and it's going to take a government to make the decision that it's going to bring about some reform in local government and then make it happen. What I would feel much happier about, though, is if the state government could identify what it is they want local government to be. They seem either incapable of doing that or unwilling to do that. And at the moment we're having this conversation about whether we go to 15 and 20 councils in Western Australia. One of the benchmarks, Premier, what are you looking for? And your stony silence coming back. I think there's a lot of goodwill within the industry to try to make it happen. So they just want that little bit of guidance about what is it you're looking for, how can we help you to get to that? And I think that's the thing that's lacking. And one would hope that Tony, as an ex-councillor, might bring that to the conversation sometime soon, I would hope.
Sure. Now, Councillor Butler, the City of Perth has responded to this mission period, and you've come up with a strategic view of what the City of Perth should look like. So what's your view on that, Perth?
I certainly have. We put forward to the Minister what will be the best system of local government for Perth through this extraordinary growth and development, which we certainly have achieved in the last 6 or 7 years. Perth has just gone ballistic. Over the next 30 to 50 years. And that's the time frame that we have to be looking at. It took us 150 years to get where we are today, and there wouldn't be too much more. We've got to now look for the next 30 to 50 years. We mentioned around the table then, someone said, well, what's the population of Perth? The population of Perth is 20,000. Well, that's not going to get us anywhere as far as the Robson report goes. At the end of the day, we have 120,000 come in every day who spend 12 hours in the City of Perth, who spend their money. That's our population. That's a daytime population. So, it's interesting when you look at different figures for populations and how those things go. I would just like to say in 1993-94, the City of Perth went through, dare I call it, de-amalgamation. And it was probably the best thing that happened to the City of Perth, to be quite honest. Although it did cost us a big quid. At the end of the day, by the time we finished setting up Vic Park and we go to Taj Mahal to Vincent, we go another Taj Mahal to Cambridge, the City of Perth finished up with $1 in the bank. $1. We had $300 million in the bank. Today, well, not today, about in 2006, 2007, we finished up, we had $300 million in the bank. And then all of a sudden we started on what people wanted to see around Perth, what the program should be, and we started reinvesting that money back into the City of Perth. Now, if we'd been to the size that we were, which went from the back of Vic Park all the way down to City Beach, that money was being reinvested in the outer suburbs. Very little was being reinvested, well, bits and pieces into the City of Perth. And in the last 6 years, you can see what the City of Perth has done. They have spent $70 million every year for the last 5 years, reinvesting back into the city. So, is big always beautiful? We put 3 scenarios to the Minister. Do a little, look at the Robson report, and then maybe we could do the same as the state of Brisbane did, the City of Brisbane did, and that is go from the City of Perth all the way down to Fremantle. That's Brisbane. So is that really what you want? And I think if you took that up on the hill, they'd all have a heart attack. So I think what we see, and I'm very, very interested to listen to the discussion today, how big we should be, where we should go, and I think we can certainly learn from it.
Thank you. Now, Brad, you came on board as a fresh face, not dissimilar to the way the Lord Mayor did, talking about progress and change for your jurisdiction. So what's excited you and what sort of made you a bit hum about today?
It's certainly going to be a big challenge for a place like Fremantle. There's a couple of things I took away. One was that if we do want to have a strategic focus, where we don't, as local government, get stuck on the small potholes and other kind of issues, then there's no doubt that local government reform is going to be necessary. The danger and the challenge for a place like Fremantle, which is a reasonably small local government of about 30,000, which is trying to renew its local centre and get investment back into it, is that, and this is our nervousness, is that if we amalgamated with much larger, more suburban councils around us, that all of a sudden that council focus on renewal, getting it back and actually making that activity centre work again, which fair to say Fremantle hasn't for a couple of decades, but I think we're on the right track, is that focus gets diluted. And this is actually following on from Rob's comments, that you actually have that sense of all of a sudden we find that Melbourne or whatever actually has other priorities, and that momentum in that direction actually gets watered down. And that's for us the danger, although we can absolutely see the necessity of actually having councils with greater capacity and greater strategic focus. I was actually really interested in talking about whether it be ward officers or local advisory boards, that the the Brisbane model, I thought was actually a really interesting way of still having local representation, and that, but in Melbourne, I think the council would have a much stronger strategic focus.
Sure. All right, thank you. Now over to you on the floor. Questions? Can't believe this.
South Perth. I certainly believe that the government, state government, have got to get off their butts. Get off their butts. Get off their butts. Release their so-called plan so that we know where we stand in terms of local government and work out what we've got to do. New Zealand, in terms of local government and work out what we've got to do. New Zealand, Auckland, we certainly don't look at roads and railways to the same extent that they do. Okay, there are a lot of things which are duplicated across the metropolitan area, but let's see this plan.
Sure. So the three local government representatives on the panel, have you got a sense of what's coming? I mean, Linton, you talked about sort of 15 to 20. Do you think that's what's coming?
I've no idea. I mean, I can only take the politicians on face value. They say 15 to 20. So I'm taking that at face value. I think it's probably closer to 15 to 20. What would concern me is that we would find in 10 years' time that it needs to be done again. What I really need to understand is what is the state government's expectation of local government. I think we know what the community's expectation is, and we manage that reasonably well. But we need to know what the state government really wants so that we can deliver those services with them. And I think it would then be very timely for state and local to sit down and say whose responsibility is what. At the moment there's, I think, too much duplication of administrative effort and not enough of service delivery. And I think there needs to be a lot of discussion about that. But we don't seem to be able to have that conversation until we can get past this amalgamation debate. It seems to have been with us almost as long as I've been in local government, which is too long.
So it's not a new thing, it's an old thing.
And just on that, the City of Perth purposely did not put in a map, B map, A map, or lines on the map to say this is where we should go, this is who we should amalgamate with, or reform with, this is what we should do. The City of Perth sat down and looked at what a capital city maybe should have as infrastructure in that capital city. And people think that we stuck a stick in the middle of the river and drew a 3-kilometre circle and said, well, you know, everything from the zoo down there, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, South Perth, but everything from the zoo
Don't forget that first one.
The incorporated city, they had a heart attack as well. So we took the lines off the map and we said, look, let's look at the infrastructure. Now, you know, a capital city should have a major hospital. They're putting a $2 billion one or whatever is down in Thomas Road. The interesting thing about that is that that hospital has actually got dissected by two local governments. One's at the front door and they did very well, they picked up the parking, the other at the back door got nothing. And we've also got Winthrop Hall, the line goes through the middle of Winthrop Hall. You know, the university, the City of Perth would love to see, and the university would love to be part of, I believe, a capital city, because they've got a vision and we want to share that vision. And that vision is to be in the top 50 in the world. So we'd love to be part of that, and they can do that with the capital city backing. When you look at the major football ground, you know, I think of the major football, it's $1 billion football ground. We believe that should be in the capital city as part of the infrastructure. It'd be nice to have the racecourse as well. At the end of the day, somebody said we were collecting people. Let's look at this one. QE2 doesn't pay rates. University doesn't pay rates. The football ground won't pay rates. The racecourse, well, I might be able to talk into paying rates. But at the end of the day, we're not collecting rates. To me, it's not bling. And the Lord, we wouldn't look good in the different bling that we're going to collect. So that's what the City of Perth have done, is looked at an overall infrastructure value around what a capital city should be. So it's not lines on that.
Now, Rodney, the audience reflecting the panel and our colleague over here, we're talking about leadership and the role of the state government in this. So, Rodney, you showed a lot of leadership. Have you got a reflection on that?
Well, there's two sorts of politicians, aren't there? Well, I think there are. They're just two. You know, those that are like being there and fight like hell just to stay there. And there are those that are there and say, well, I've got a responsibility in this area and it's my responsibility to make it better. And I think you want to seek out those politicians and get behind them. Because I think too much of local council is about sort of just being there. And I think that's the big barrier to the change that is necessary if we're to confront the future that you'd want in an exciting and vibrant city. And just to pick up a point that's been made, I can't begin to understand this. I think it's the Fremantle point. And it's this idea that across a region that you set up an administration to be able to make appropriate decisions that relate across the region. And that somehow a decision made is going to adversely affect a part of it. That to me isn't right. Because if you divide it up into the parts, you're actually making a suboptimal decision always across the whole region. And everyone's a loser. But if you make good decisions across an economic region, it actually lifts the whole region. And so Fremantle doesn't lose by good stuff happening in the city of Perth. Actually it benefits. Because if you get the good things happening with the bling in the city of Perth, you'll be dragging the tourists in and they'll be going down to Fremantle for a look. And so I don't get that bit. And I think we have to think, what is the economic reach of the decisions that our council is making, and respond accordingly, and not think because we don't have our little council, somehow we're going to lose. That doesn't follow. In fact, to me it's the reverse.
Now, Rob, that struck a chord with you. You're nodding sagely there.
Yeah, it's certainly not for Auckland to tell you what to do. We will just kind of tell you what Auckland did. And I know we don't have a state government, but in many ways our national government is the equivalent of your state government. Auckland, the amalgamated Auckland from north to south is approximately the same distance as Greater Perth, north to south. We've got 1.4 million people, you've got 1.8. So, you know, I think there's a fair old comparison. I've read the Robson report, you know, reads very well, it sounds quite similar to our Royal Commission report. So you've done all that, you've had all the consultation, you've done the looking back, time to look forward. I think everyone that I've spoken to seems to be in agreement that you need, it needs to be mandatory, not voluntary. I think you're going to need some special legislation. And once you've got the legislation that says 14 councils are going to disappear on whatever date, it's amazing how that focuses the mind of people who are not part of the new Perth. So get the legislation, get the right leadership, as we were lucky to have with Rodney and Mark, and for goodness sake, get on with it. And we had an old professor who helped restructure my law firm, and he had a saying, roughly right is better than precisely wrong. I'm very rough, but and don't think everything will be completely right on day one. You will continue to evolve after that. But you know, in Auckland, we're out to compete with every one of the major Australian cities, including Perth. So from our perspective, bug around as long as you like.
Just wanted to support what Linton said about having a discussion on what state government wants of local government. The question that I have is how do we get the state government to start that discussion, and do the lines on the map mean that we've got the cart and no horse, or should we be doing it another way around?
Good question.
Sadly, I think the horse has bolted, and what's in the public domain now is the promise that a map will be delivered and we'll be asked to work to that map. So I think we're going to have to roll with that. my fear is, as I said, that in 10 years' time we'll revisit this debate. So it won't be resolved once and for all, unfortunately.
How do we get the government talking?
Well, I think we just need to be able to perhaps show some leadership in making the first step happen, so that we can genuinely engage with them for the second step. For our visitors, it's strange, but in the time I've been in local government, there's now more local governments in Western Australia than there was when I joined. And it was interestingly Conservative governments who created those extra ones by being concerned that mayors were becoming too powerful and broke them up to make sure they weren't as powerful. Yeah, look, I'm not quite sure what the government's mindset is, frankly.
Jude.
I just think I'd offer a couple of comments. One is the New South Wales panel has supported the concept of the general competency powers of local government rather than restricting local government to a particular sets of services. I know that question came up before in relation to roles and responsibilities. New South Wales, there's been instances of rural communities putting in place medical services because doctors had vacated those areas and older folk were really requiring it. So general competency powers allow that to happen, but the rate base and other types of revenue and financial assistance grants have to be sufficient to be able to support that, if that's the case, or lower priority areas get dropped down. On the issue of the general reform, I think we're all of one mind that, you know, a roadmap will be important. A sense of momentum is important. Having, I think, as much time, this is a personal view, but also the panel in New South Wales shares the view that local democracy is important, and trying to balance then as much time as possible for councils to be in place and a new council to come in, but also recognising sometimes that there is a role for administrators or commissioners to create a sense of a clean break. So I'm sure those sorts of things would be being thought through.
Sure. Now, one last question down here, and I'm going to hand over to... Yes, that's you.
I'm Councillor Bissett, Town of Victoria Park, Deputy Mayor. I've been local government since 1980. If you look very carefully at the Perth in Focus, you'll find what the City of Perth is considering in their plan. It's got Burswood Peninsula on it. It's a pity that Perth in Focus, as far as I'm concerned, when somebody comes into the City of Perth, once they come under that viaduct at the Burswood, they are in the City of Perth. The City of Perth stretches from up north to down south. A tourist doesn't even know that they're not in the City of Perth. It looks like the City of Perth. But somebody to actually go in there and grab a piece of infrastructure, I don't know what for. As far as I'm concerned, the City of Perth should be the CBD, because the simple reason is, back in '94, the argument was from the Building Management Association, or Authority, or whatever it was, then that they were paying the rates, or paying money for the stuff out in suburbia. Yes, they were. What's the City of Perth doing now? Stretching itself out once more. If I was a building owner in the City of Perth, I'd say, well, freeway, railway line, Victoria Avenue and the river, and here's your city, and give the rest to somebody else. But to actually, the plan that we're waiting for, the worst thing about this is the staff of all the local governments in the metropolitan area are wondering what their next career move is. It's been going on for too long.
So, Mark, I'm going to give you...
I'll just comment on that just quickly.
Mark, I'm going to give you the very final say on the panel.
I don't underestimate the staff. They know what needs to be done. They know change is probably going to occur. The key is to harness their thoughts in the solution when the policy setting has been agreed.
You know, I have a lot of confidence in the professionalism of local government staff. That's probably all I want to say.
Thank you. Now, Mark Pettigrew, can you come up and please give a vote of thanks to our panellists? And if you can all just stay in place, it's too much to move you all. A very eminent panel. Thank you very much for your debate and discussion. And I'll leave it to Mark to formally thank you.
Well, what a fabulous lunch, and how honoured are we to have such distinguished guests, shall I say, and just the power of what you've been able to achieve has just been amazing. To have that knowledge here in this room and be able to have that shared with us is fantastic. So I do want to thank them each individually. So Rodney, Mark, Jude, and the panel members, Rob, Linton, Brad, and Rob. So thank you very much. I want to acknowledge the presenters in particular, and there will be some gifts later on tonight, and I think there also is some photos here. You get to pick. This is from our PERTH in Focus photographic competition, so you actually get to pick one for your wall or your office. So that's a little bit of thank you. I also want to thank members and guests for attending. It's the Committee for Perth doesn't exist without you all, and it's terrific that we've been able to get such a good turnout here today. Just wanted to make some concluding comments and maybe just sort of wrap it all up. I think Marion said at the start, we were going to have some invigorating and lively discussion, and I think we certainly did get that for sure. Rod, you challenged us to keep the politics out of the debate, and I think that was a pretty good challenge. Probably easier said than done, but I think it's certainly worth pursuing. And that gelling with the central government, I think, is a really powerful thing. If you think about what's about to happen here, that ability to actually have those much bigger, broader conversations and a more united sort of voice is a very, very powerful thing at all levels of government. You talked about making the decisions for the next 50 years, and a couple of the speakers and panellists spoke to that, and I think that's really critical too for us. This is about the next 30 to 50 years, it's not about the next 10 or 15 or 5. We've really got to be thinking in those sort of numbers. I was blown away by the savings. I don't know about the rest of you, but just hearing those numbers in the savings was dramatic, and there certainly is a case there. And Rod, the thing that I loved about your presentation was that you were obviously very proud of your achievements, and I think that's an important lesson for all of us. When we are proud of our achievements, don't be afraid to say so. But you were very quick to also acknowledge the great team that helped you get there. So I found you a tremendous engaging speaker, and I tell you what, if I ever had a scrum to put together, you would certainly be. Mark, you stated that there's nothing better than a deadline to drive performance, and that certainly is very true, and I think we could all identify with that. I found your delivery very humble. You made it all sound so easy. You just put together a project plan, you just get a few good people, you have a few meetings, and you have a deadline that you sort of later find out there wasn't quite a deadline, but there could have been a bit of flexibility there, but, and then it just sort of happened. But I have no doubt, Mark, that would have been, what you pulled off there was something quite remarkable, and a real credit to you and your team. I thought it was a great KPI that you shared with us, the KPI, the importance of no complaints. I thought that was a really good one, and I know that resonates probably with government and local government, but I think it resonates with the private sector as well, the importance of those no complaints, and that being a really great KPI. And you left us with the message about the communication and the goodwill of the staff and the right policy setting, and I think that were three really powerful things that the exercise here we can take away and learn from. So thank you, Mark. Jude, what an energetic speaker. You've obviously done it once or twice before. I'd say many, many times. Thank you for your delivery, and the thing that I found amazing was just Jude's span of influence. The involvement that you've had right across a whole multitude of facets of panels, states and different size entities. So that knowledge that you brought today was great. I was blown away by your comment about Melbourne. You know, if we just tweak Melbourne and dial up a few different tiles, we can get a 4%. And it wasn't until you said it was actually the GDP of the nation, not just Melbourne. I thought that was pretty staggering. And stressing that, you know, that strategic capacity rather than the financial savings, the need to really focus on that broader level. And you know, I found the concept of the global cities as well in metropolitan Sydney, to really, you know, focus at that strategic sort of level and bring that thinking to bear by thinking a bit differently. I found that fascinating. And also found it fascinating that mergers, you know, aren't always the right solution in every case. So, you know, sometimes, you know, grouping up isn't always the right solution. So we've got to be very careful about thinking about that. You challenged us to think about the greater good, and I think what our speakers brought to us today was they really gave us an example of the greater good of, you know, what can be done and shared their stories with us. From the panellists, you know, lots of great conversation, good questions from the floor. I thought that was terrific. Rob, your comment about, you know, roughly right is better than precisely wrong will stick with me for a long time, and I'll probably use that many times over in coaching on that if it's okay. So look, thanks again to our speakers and panellists. I really enjoyed it, and I think it really set a good stage for some ongoing debate. So terrific. Thank you.